It's Heavy Things Lightly. It's First Things Foundation. Today, Pavel Shchelin, philosopher and all-around cool guy. All right, guys, Pavel is here, Pavel Shchelin. And this is one of my... I was looking forward to this as much as anything since our Art of Tamada, Pavel, because we had such a good time at this event. You became a Tamada. You were sort of the wanted Tamada at our table there by the end. I think people were really enjoying your toasts. But we found out a lot about you. I knew some before that you're a philosopher and you command this quite a big podcast, almost 100,000 listeners, mostly in Slavonic. So, or in Russian, yeah, not Slavonic. Were you Russian? Will you tell us about yourself? Who are you? For folks listening to Heavy Things Lightly.
Well, thank you very much for having me, John. And, well, to answer your question, I guess I do have to start on top. So, I am a Russian and I am an Orthodox Christian. That would be two cornerstones of my identity, which I think is important to put these things in hierarchy. I live currently in the United States, which provides a very interesting perspective on everything that I do, because exactly I do have a privilege and an opportunity to almost see things from two different eyes, and to have an opportunity to shift from different frameworks, from different perspectives, and from different optics, if you want to put it this way. Not an easy skill to master. We honestly pretend to kind of, even at people who do it professionally, but to really learn how to do it, you almost need to live in different cultures, as you know yourself, for like really long period of time. To understand a certain culture, you need to spend like several years there. Tourism is not enough. And I happen to travel quite a lot in my life. So I lived in Europe for several years. I lived for 23 years in Russia. I now live for 2 years in the States. So all of these things combined create a very...
What kind of household did you grow up in?
It gets personal. Interesting. I was raised by my mom and my grandma. That's it. In Moscow.
In Moscow. Speaking Russian as Moscow.
Of course, yes. I do have a strong Moscow accent in Russian, if that's what you're wondering.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Because guys, we're going to get into the whole Ukrainian-Russian situation. We're going to get into philosophy and how it applies to these wars around the world and how it applies.
Philosophy of war is very interesting.
So, I want you guys to know about Pavel that way. How did you decide to go overseas? How did changing out of the Russian culture come about?
Okay, and here comes, I think, not just who I am, but what I do. Because it is related in that respect. So as you've said already, I'm currently doing political philosophy. So not just any philosophy, but political philosophy. To clear, and I can put it this way: since my childhood, I had, if there is one trait which I would say is consistent with a general journey which I undertook, it's love to asking questions and looking for different answers. So you can say that all my journeys and all the different stops on my journeys are all one way or another connected with this phenomenon of asking certain questions and looking for answers. So I moved abroad to do several master programs because I thought I was disappointed with certain things in Russia in terms of exactly types of questions I've been asking. And the logic was, I will look for answers somewhere else. And so I studied in different places. Then I realized, you don't have answers either. And then there came a lot of self-studying and then a lot of coming back to traditions which are not in a center of modern academia, like those with either in Russia or in Europe or in the United States. And that's how all of these different experiences, through this general imperative for looking and searching for answers, regardless of whether it's, let's say, convenient or politically correct or whatever frame you want to put it into, kind of led to where I am now.
So there was a curiosity about the questions you were asking that went, you needed more than academia could.
Eventually.
Was academia looking similar in Russia and also in Europe and in the United States? Did you feel like?
I would say nowadays way more than it would be in the past, definitely, because the academic tradition became pretty globalized. So there are still huge differences, country to country. Obviously, there is still national character left, but it's very interesting. Like now I can it's interesting that now I can explain what was, I would say, the general pattern and what I was looking for. No matter whether you stay in Europe, in Britain, in America, or in Russia, there is one big commonality between all of these traditions, and they're all of the new world, all different versions of modernity, like using the language of your podcast. Yes, one is more, let's say, liberal, another is more other sides, but it's all predicated on this effectively system of modernity. And I think what kind of was moving my journey was that I was asking questions modernity is not good to answer. And that, I think, led to all of these different trials and errors and mistakes and like all of this different intents. So like it took me a while to understand that you can't find answers to certain problems within the modernity framework.
Give us a favorite question. Give us a favorite question you've been asked.
Well, again, as a philosopher now, it's pretty standard things to what we discuss nowadays in the symbolic world crowd. The question of unity and multiplicity. It's the question of war and peace. Ultimately, it's the question why people do what they do. That's the most interesting, I would say, point of being, because, for example, we have this understanding often that people are acting rationally or people are acting in accordance with their best interests. Well, it's not the case, simply. Like you can't answer this type of question rationally. You need to go beyond rationality. And that's already like not exactly what academia is dealing with. Another important thing in academia where there is a big uniqueness nowadays, generally worldwide, it's almost impossible to ask big questions, like big simple question. We wouldn't say a dumb question, let's say. You need to go usually in a very specific manner, in a very specific particular field, particular area, to put it in the context of very particular literature. And then you make a small impact. But you cannot really ask big things. And it's the trend of the last 100 years.
Before
that? Original intention was very good, honestly. Original intention was to raise standards and to move the humanity closer to science, because that's the tricky part. Humanities is not science. Philosophy is not science. It's way closer to art. And we still call them liberal arts, for example, in English. But we want to pretend it is science, and we want to use scientific methods, and we want to do all of this hypothesis of correlation, like proving, or like proven and not proven. And when you do this in humanities, you can't really ask big. That's just not the way it works.
This is so fascinating. I find this, you're saying something so true. I call it an Aristotelian inclination to chop everything into parts.
It's interesting. I would call it Cartesian way more than Aristotelian.
I like that too. That's good.
Because Aristotelian was at least trying to keep it as a whole. Yes, you look for different reasons, but you keep it as a whole. Like wholeness is a peak category for Aristotelian. But that's what I call modernity, like general approach of modernity.
I think Western people use Aristotle in certain ways to fortify the particular and the study of that. But I hear you, Kurt. Yeah, Descartes' a better place to start. I like that. So, do I have that right, though? Do you think the humanities they're trying to particularize everything all the time?
Nowadays. And it's interesting that they never used to do it. And that's why it's almost humanities are making themselves irrelevant by trying to do it, because that's even a trickier part. That in its attempt to become more objective and scientific, they're becoming less and less relevant because they cannot ask questions which they're actually supposed to ask.
Well, this is tough. Do you think that fear of asking the big question is something like the fear of asking about the good, which is something like asking about the God?
Or absolutely. You can say that basically it is a hierarchical structure. All humanities are underpinned on philosophy. So there is the hierarchy. So you go to philosophy, and without philosophy, you can do history, for example, because history is not the matter of studying facts. It's a matter of creating stories. It's a matter of myths. It's making sense out. History is about making sense out of the facts. And this act is intrinsically philosophical. It's intrinsically non-scientific. It's intrinsically ethical, categorical, but basically not scientific if you understand science as scientific method, as we understand for the last.
So this is just like a beautiful, just rich butter on top of some wonderful toast. You are making this thing taste so good. I totally am utterly in this place. So let's keep going for a second. And so you kept searching for a place to ask the big questions. You got to the United States. Here's a question for you. When Americans try to do the big question, are they trying to do it like Russians do it?
No, it's do it in a very different way. Americans really try to... Usually Americans are really good with numbers. That's one thing. Americans are really good with numbers. That's very historical American thing. And the second good thing is it's also good and a bad thing. Here comes the tricky part. Americans are great about studying Americans. It makes sense. America is definitely a culture which is truly interested only in itself. That's a very important part. And that's why if you read the way Americans usually study somebody else, it already works way worse. Not nearly good. But if you want to read the way Americans understand Americans, that's where all of this absolutely rich field of sociology, anthropology, etc. But at the same time, American understanding of opposite is very limited. That's I find very fascinating. American even academia feels incredibly challenged to understand culture which is not based on the premises of American philosophy. Americans sincerely believe that the American worldview is a universal worldview. That's very, and it is in academia. It is gigantic part in academia. You do have technically all of these African studies, like Russian studies, but it's 9 times out of 10, and actually the more scientific it tries to become misses the key, the whole why it's happening, because it can't truly understand the philosophical foundation of certain worldview, or trying to categorize it, but without embracing it, and then you're almost missing all of the nuances.
Why do you think I don't think anybody listening to this podcast would disagree with you, at least not anybody who's tried to teach after experiencing international culture on any deep level. Everyone I bump into who's traveled the way we travel, and they always say, they say what you just said. Americans, they're really good at doing their stuff, but we don't really get other people. So what would you attribute that to? I mean, let's not even call it a bad thing. Let's just call it an American thing. How did we get this way?
It's the other side of your virtues, ultimately. I would honestly put it in this way. One thing is you are really good in doing what you're doing. And by really good, I do mean really good. You can call it the side effect of Protestant ethics, the general foundation of America as a Protestant culture with a Protestant colony. And truth be told, there is this element in Protestantism that it is my church and kind of everything which is outside of it, I'm not truly interested in it. But within this confinement of my commonwealth and my community, I will do it really well and really good. And then it combined with general industrialness, productivity, work ethics. So all of these things led to the fact that Americans are incredibly talented, like in terms of doing business. And that's a key phrase of doing business, let's say. And so good. The problem is not everything in this world is about business.
Yeah. He made me smile.
No, but that's the thing. So Americans are great in doing business. Ultimately, like everything like which is related to this field, like yes, you're getting your iPhone, you're getting your Starship, I don't know, like, whatever things you're getting proud of. But when it comes to understanding, it's not about business. And that's the thing. For most part of businesses, and especially for businesses America really excel at, you don't really need to understand. Or you need to understand only like on the surface level. Like it's enough. Like you need the level of understanding sufficient for the business purpose.
Well, and those purposes are about utility.
Yes. They're pretty utilitarian, yeah.
Yeah, and I would argue, I want to know what you think as a philosopher. It's very nice, by the way, Pavel. This is a great conversation. I'm thankful for it. For me, the American leap into its own skin, so to speak, the time, the period, the phrase, the time, the era in which we became ourselves was when we started to adopt the utilitarian philosophies of Mill and the utilitarian, the Englishman who gave us a way to do business and sideline our morality. So I'm talking about the 19th century. There was an ability to sideline the morality and create something like a gospel of wealth, like a moment when you can go, it's good to make money. Instead of making money as a thing, it doesn't have a moral. There's nothing moral about making money, but we found a way to tell that story. You do agree with that?
I do agree, but it is trickier than this. This is actually, like you are right, but I want to push it a little bit deeper to the reasons you are right. Because original American idea, and even not original, I would call an American idea, is very deeply tied to a particular ethical framework. It's a Christian Protestant framework. It's a Christian Protestant framework of the fathers. And if you read American, let's say, founding fathers, you will find easily that they're constantly talking about that the system we're building is for Christian moral people, and it won't work in any other context. And this is what you can come to the, which I sometimes call the paradox of John Locke, basically. Because the paradox of John Locke is pretty simple. He already lives in time when he doesn't want to be under Pope. He doesn't want to be under Pope. He doesn't want to have this, let's say, source of moral authority coming from another person, like a very particular person. Hence, you understand, Englishman, Pope, not great relationship historically after a certain man and 8 wives. Point being, like, and several long bloody history. Let's put it this way.
King Henry, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But also he is smart enough to understand that you need a certain kind of objective moral code for people just to behave in a proper fashion. And that's why basically Locke creates the system of Deus ex machina. So we do have this objective natural law, which comes directly from God. But it just comes. But we don't have kind of anything in between. And that's a paradox. Why it is a paradox? Because in your system, truth be told, there is nothing really which supports this belief in God. But you need this belief in God for your system to function. And here comes your famous American Declaration of Independence. Because here comes the trick. We hold these truths to be self-evident, etc., 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 etc. And everything the founding fathers did and everything the founding fathers written was under the assumption that so many things are self-evident. Well, and here comes the trick. They are not. They are contingent upon a very particular moral and ethical system moral and ethical foundation, which you took for granted. Ultimately, that's what an irony of America. Like, you took it for granted. You thought, like, and it makes sense how it was in the 18th century. Everybody's a Christian. Why would anybody not be a Christian? Yes, you can be Trinitarian, you can be Unitarian, you can be Presbyterian, whatever. You can be all the different denominations, but of course you're a Christian. But here comes the trick. So in effect, there is an element of parasitism. So you took the ethical framework of high Middle Ages, or people born in like high Middle Ages. You cut it from, like, in terms of this, cut by, I mean, like, reason-wise. Because then you could say, why do I need God? I have reason. Like, it's very easy from this stage to move to, I don't need God, I just need reason. As you know, doesn't work this way, but you can see how it works philosophically. And then, I don't need God, I just need prosperity. I don't need God, I just need money. So this is what happens in 19th and early 20th century, that this is getting cut. But originally, just to be clear, founding fathers do understand that if this moral link will be cut, everything will start disintegrating and falling apart.
I would argue that's true. I do think there was a powerful, it's not a cartel of thinkers, but there was a group of thinkers who already, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas, they already knew what they were doing in terms of creating that parasitic relationship. They were a little like Jordan Peterson these days, in that, like, we just kind of need some moral stuff in order for us to be our full best selves. I do think they were in that place.
Yeah, and that's
some.
No, but it's actually a very good example, because I would say in that sense it is the quintessential, this American dream. Like, we do need it, but we don't want to truly submit ourselves to it. Like, we want to save this, because as an Orthodox, there is a huge element of humility, there is a huge element of submission, there is a huge element of receiving it, not just taking it. And this was definitely a more different project, which didn't want any of those things. It wanted to create good through your own strengths. It wanted to do good through your own power. It wanted to do all of this, like, to free all of this productive. That was the Lockean reason, because, like, in general, one of the big imperative of this Enlightened movement, because moral order is restrictive. Like, and they thought it was too restrictive. So we do need to liberate. Here comes the whole problem of liberty, to liberate man so he can do more and more and more good. But we still need to, but intuitively we understand that we need to certain guardrails. And back then it was just enough to say that there are these 3, 4, 5, 10 principles which are given directly through God, which are like, and then, but outside of these borders of interest, you can do whatever you want. Well, problem, it doesn't work this way on a generational level. That's kind of the trick. It doesn't work this way on a generational level. And eventually, like, you come to the point, well, I will a little bit escalate, but you need to understand that the modern, let's say, radical liberal thinks, which most traditionalists in America nowadays are obviously opposing, or, let's say, feeling very uncomfortable with. But there is a way to see them as not a breakage of American tradition, but as a continuation of American tradition. Because in a pursuit of happiness, remember this line of an American Declaration? Well, if there is no objective moral order, then how can you tell me then one way of pursuing happiness is objectively morally reprehensible than the other way of pursuing? And here comes the trick. Founding fathers didn't have this problem because everybody is a Christian, so of course they will pursue happiness, like, in the way we envision them to do.
Now, if you look at the Russian story.
Yeah.
So one thing Americans, I think, really misunderstand is that most every culture is imbued with a definition of freedom. There's no culture. I'm talking Malians, Russian. There's no culture that's like freedom. Yeah, we don't really have that. No one wants that here. There aren't political writers in Mali saying we don't want freedom. They just think freedom's been given through Allah and through the Quran. So the Russian story, there's a freedom element, but how do Russians understand freedom compared to how Americans do?
Okay. There are two important ways I can answer your question, and depending on how much time we have. So I will try to quickly cover both.
Sure. But then we're getting into the war, like the actual.
I think it might be connected. One that basically is about a little bit philosophical and linguistical terms, and another one is a little bit of the relationship between an individual and the state, and that's very related in the Russian context. Well, first thing first, the word freedom is very loaded, and it's not exactly precise. Here, we do need to do a little bit of language explanation. You have effectively two types of freedom, like in any almost philosophical or language system. One is effectively a freedom you can understand to express yourself, to express your will. And another is the freedom to master, to be a master of your own desires, or something along this line. So one is a freedom to just do whatever you want. Another one is a freedom to, effectively to do something, and to do a very particular something. Christ in the John's chapter 8 talks about the second, when you say, no person who is a slave of sin is free, effectively. Remember, this is a very important part. Well, you can understand that the Western individual freedom actually is quite a lot about the opposite. Like, it's about freedom to express yourself no matter, regardless of what you do. It's a freedom of expression. And you can understand it on a very symbolic way, of literal any expression, whatever comes. Like, whatever comes of you.
And a freedom to become whatever you want.
Yes.
The becoming's untied from the... It's like the point of being is to be something new.
Exactly.
Which is interesting, but okay, I'll let you keep going.
Yeah. It is very interesting, and that's one of the, if you want, the key contradiction. And another, once again, but there is a second type of freedom, which is effectively like Christianity teaches. And in that sense, the Russian understanding intuitively is very orthodox. The true freedom is not coming from institution. The true freedom coming from you being able to overcome your sin, like, or effectively, or your weaknesses, or something like this. Two different words to explain this in Russian would be samovlastие, so power of mastering oneself, and samovolия, to express one's own will, to do whatever I want. My will be done. Let my will be done. Something like this. Well, the key part is that the second, Russians know very well the danger of the second one. And here comes to Russian relationship with the state. People often think that Russians are just, state addicts. And like, you just, state. And to an extent, it's even true. But but people don't really understand why it is the case. And it is the case because for Russians, it's historically a choice or a conclusion that came through blood and lots of different mistakes. Maybe better than anybody else in the world, Russians know what happens when they just let the will run wild. Because there is this archetype of will, and like there is even this word voля, like absolutely unburdened, unrestrained, chaotic force. And if you imagine the Russian landscape with all its gigantic, endless space, endless forests, endless steppe, endless, like just endless, no borders. It's not like you have your nice little, close. Here is one river, here is another mountain, like all this getting closer. No, it's chaos. It's just one gigantic field of chaos, and this chaos actually somebody else constantly coming. Like some nomadic tribe is constantly coming, burning your whole life to the ground, constantly happening. So there is a danger from the outside, but also there is a danger from yourself because you're becoming a really self-destructive, and Russia has really bad track record of self-destructive behavior. So Russian attitude to the state, it is a lot of submission, but it's submission because you needed to survive. You needed to survive, and you need a certain level of submission. Even if it's not like, you understand, the state probably won't be doing that good of a job. But if you let these things run wild, if you let these things run amok, well, then look what happens. Look what happens back then. And there is a certain cycle, unfortunately. There is a cycle in Russian history when Russians forget about this, and then revolution comes. But generally speaking, this whole love towards the state as some people, and that's what most Western academia legitimately is missing, in my opinion. They don't understand the reason why. And on the contrary, what Russians have discovered through its saints and heroes. If you transform yourself, and if you put your understanding of freedom towards what effectively is Orthodox teaching, no matter how statist you can be free. You can be stayed in the wildest camps of Siberia. So the trade-off is not that bad. That's why it's coming. So that's, I think, the Russian would answer. If you truly want freedom, well, then any state institution, any external thing is kind of irrelevant. And then it becomes almost a practical question. Like, do you need the state institution just for it not to collapse? Well, you kind of do. But don't bring freedom into me. So if your argument for freedom is to do your own will, it's not a good argument. That's effectively what would be said. And if your argument for freedom is to be master of yourself, but just go to a monastery, go somewhere, I don't know. These opportunities are always open to you. So I think that would be the most brief way of answering.
So good. So, hey, everybody, it's December. We're doing our end of year giving. We're trying to create match. There's always a donor that will match our work at the end of the year. www.first-things.org. Donate. Go and become a monthly donor. And then, if you really want to be crazy, consider coming and working with us. 2 years. Put people over plans and be your own boss in a unique world, doing incredible things, most of them born out of the notion of facilitation, making things easier for others. A true, beautiful, godly endeavor. First things, thanks for listening. Let's get back. And so take us there, because it's really clear now. Those two worldviews, they're colliding on some level right now in Ukraine.
They are, and I would even say that, just to be clear, they are not, these worldviews, you need to understand, they are not, there is no borders between them, just to be clear. There is a lot of this desire to just will inside the Russian culture. You can say that there is always this temptation element for it, that role comes, just to be clear. Otherwise, I think I would represent Russians as, too saintly, which they're definitely not. But if you want to talk on and you can see it in Russian literature again. Russian literature is a Russian philosophy, or the lives of Russian saints and Russian heroes. That would be the better way of understanding it. So there is always this internal tension between two. But at least I would say there is understanding and appreciation of this tension. Whereas in the Western story, you don't really see this tension and appreciation. It's kind of almost the second part of this mastering over yourself is almost completely neglected.
So this mastering of yourself, let's just, I'll say it. That is a very Eastern vocabulary. That's an Eastern way of expressing Christianity. We don't do that in the West. Basically, when we feel constrained within a church environment, we just create a new church.
Yes.
We just express a new will, but we call it Christianity. And I do really think something has to be addressed, which is, in America, I think of it as cauliflower. If you look at cauliflower, it doesn't seem to have a starting spot. It doesn't seem, if it could keep going, it would hold no shape and create no borders. And the church in the East has always been the place in which you go to submit so that you can heal. It's the thing you described. It's the inside freedom, right? And do you think that means America and Russia? How do they make peace? Because I actually think this also applies not just to America and to Russia. I think there's just societies around the world. I think of Ethiopia, or I think of Mexico, where they're also in the same conversation. It's also sort of these two ways of thinking plus culture. I don't know. There's a lot there. Clean it up for you.
I won't be able to clean up everything, that's for sure. That was
no one's ever done that for my wife. Comes really close.
It was so bad. Okay, but concerning American and Russia, I think there is several interesting layers which are rarely talked about. First things first, you need to understand that both America and America and Russia together are in one respect way more closer to each other than to any other nation on the planet. Like, that's a very interesting part. Because both of these countries, or civilizations, if you want to put it this way, are idea-centric cultures. What I mean by it, words, philosophy. Idea of America appeared before America. And you can say that idea of Russia appeared before Russia. Anybody can become an American. Anybody can become Russian. And in that respect, they're unique, quite unique. I can tell you, I lived in Hungary for 4 years. You can't really become Hungarian. You can't. Or you can't even become truly German. You can't truly become, you can talk about all of this multiculturalism on the surface, but deep inside, no. It's by blood, by families. It's very narrow, still you an almost clan-based community. I think because of its space and because of this ironically philosophical elements, both Russia and both America are idea-centric civilizations. And in that sense, they're way closer to each other. That's one important, element of it. And that's why it's actually, I think, both uniquely interesting to each other. Russians are sincerely fascinated with Americans. So Americans are pretty much fascinated with Russians. So there is a much more unity here, than it would emerge. But that's on a civilizational, cultural level. On a state level, here comes another problem. And here comes another problem with Americans. Less a little bit now with the Russians. I will explain why. America is a very unique country because it's the mostly externally involved country nowadays, which understands the least about the external world. I discovered Americans sincerely don't get what they are doing when they leave America. Sincerely. And you can see how it creates quite a lot of tension. We're just bringing American way. We're just bringing them.
Come on, man. What's the problem? It's a mall. It's a mall. We can shop together.
Coming back to the business problem. Americans are great in doing business, but politics, culture, philosophy, history, they are not business. And here comes a lot of contradiction, because whether you want it or not, Americans are doing a lot of these things outside, but they're almost doing it irresponsibly. And here comes this weird trick. So there is some, I think, maturing is going to happen in the coming century, in my opinion, for America, because it's learning through trial and error. It's still relatively new historical project. So there'll be a lot of trial and error. And ultimately, that's the problem is that America found itself in a position of being a global empire, not being philosophically. Yes, I know it sounds very radical, but just to be clear, America is not philosophically prepared to be a global empire and to carry this responsibility. Let me put it this way. The world can say, even given America a chance in the 90s, and kind of didn't work nearly as well as it thought. But let's say America is continental superpower, or continental great power, has, truth be told, Russia has no turf with America as a continental superpower. If you're just staying to your hemisphere, or you're just being around, other parts of this hemisphere might start having problems. But if you want sincerely, that's actually a huge imperative for a little bit connecting to war. And there are so many layers in war, which we can touch some. But honestly, from a perspective of Russian power, that's what they kind of mean. Stop messing into our business. And yes, you can say it's not your business, it's the business of different countries. And we can talk about it later, why it's not that simple in that region, why there is a history involved. In general, why modern understanding of statehood is not exactly honest with itself.
Can we do that right now for a second?
Okay. Well, with the first...
Well, hold on. Tell me this. Because you've had all these great interviews in Russia, and the Slavic world knows you. I want all you guys to check out what Pavel does. So just do a report from the edge for us, because so many of us Americans, we send all this information around on our feeds, and we read this, we read that, but you're actually speaking to people in their own language. Well, how many Russians are just like, we should probably stop bombing now. This is enough. Is it most of the people you talk to? Or are most saying, it's not time. It's not time. The West
It's not
doesn't
the right.
stand yet.
You are not asking the right question right now. That's just to be clear. Because one thing you do need to understand about Russian, like in this war, it's not like they're happy with it. That's one important element. It's not like they're happy with it. So it's not, so what I mean, it was not the right question. It was, I would say, it was an emotional question.
Yes.
And the war is not an emotional matter. The war is an ethical matter, and the war is a rational matter. Like, that's a very interesting part. War is not itself really an emotional matter. It's becoming now an emotional matter. And there is honestly, a really whole long conversation why war is becoming an emotional matter and how it relates to other patterns of the puzzle we've been talking. But let's put it this way. So Russians have definitely never been happy with this whole situation. But here comes the trick. Your question also almost presupposes that war is not a natural part of international relations. And it's just historically false fact. All history is written by wars, through wars, with wars, and wars never stopped. Here comes a little bit of our Western arrogance. Just because, and even in Europe, we can say, because there is a whole war in Yugoslavia in 90s, just to be clear. But wars never stopped. But if you notice, like, the first reaction of us humans, and even my personal, I can tell you, like, even I, for 2 months, was kind of within this gaze, is like, it has never happened. Like, we've been honestly reacting as if it's first time in our lifetime, and it's the first time in our history. And that tells actually way more about us. Like, the right question would be, why this is happening? Like, and I think one of the whys is like, it's for us to check our understanding, for all of us, of the way we perceive the reality, like of international relations, of the way the world is. Because it's a very arrogant to have this feeling which underpins modern man that the history starts with me. If war has never happened in my lifetime, then war should never happen. Well, sorry, simply not true. And if you look in the history of the region, like, basically what I'm saying, and that's what here a lot of Orthodox actually, and Russian particular philosophy is studying, the tragic historical meaning of war, where it's understood almost as a matter of calamity and almost as a matter of, let's say, God's not punishment, but let's say correctional way. Let me put it this way. So that would be more clear to understanding to why it is, because we tend to understand, there is basically the general Western understanding is everything was fine. There was one bad guy. It started it. Let's move the bad guy out. It will all be great. Correct. Well, it's not the way.
It's the understanding. It's not correct, but it's the understanding.
Yes. And it's not simply. Like, there were many reasons. So important is like why we let it happen, like why it has happened, what causes led to this. So, and the short answer is, until you remove the causes, any talk about peace is effectively a form of either cowardness or manipulation. And that's, I think, which painfully Russians are now remembering almost. Like, it's almost, they're also forgot. In the 90s, we also took this kind of Western framework that the end of history of Fukuyama is here, everything will be great and dandy. Not the case. There are many reasons why it is happening, and there are many purposes to which it's happening. There is a providential element in war. Like, that's another philosophical element.
Do you think then part of the reason for the war is because this, let's just call it a lack of introspection when it comes to American understanding of the world? Is that way of seeing the world being challenged in a way that's reshaping the world? In other words, that's the end of our time doing this type of leadership, and that's what we need to learn from this.
Well, in one way, yes. I would say it's the smallest part of it, but in one way, yes. And that's why, for example, you can see this weird support from countries like India, China, Arab countries to this whole process, because that's what the whole talk about multipolarities, which I think philosophically is unsustainable, but the desire for which is definitely coming. So it's effectively the desire for America to stop being a superpower and become one of many great powers, but not the only superpower. And that was one of the big tension. And that's effectively what Russia challenged. Again, difference. Maybe it was the wrong reason, but that's what ended up challenging. This challenge definitely happened. And coming back to the how it can stop. So war is not stopping until it reaches its telos. That's another important understand, its purpose. But the real purpose, I think, and it's my philosophical, let's say, assumption. And I think people understand it way better than elite in Russia, for example, and I talk to quite many, that the true purpose of war is to reveal yourself. Let's say to reveal you in your weaknesses and to reveal you in a way you are, but also in a way it's kind of pointing a way to where you should be. You can see I see symbolic world cloud. You can see war as a flood, as a symbolic flood. It comes, it washes away all of the dead things that you've been carrying, and you want it to carry, or it's making you to choose dead things over living things, even if you don't want to let this dead thing go. So you're kind of causing it upon yourself through your all personal faults on an individual level, but also on a collective cultural level. That's another thing. So there is one of the Russian philosophers of the 20th century, Karsavin. He has this, I think, very beautiful way of understanding collective as a symphonic person. So there is one person, and there is collective as, symphony of people, symphonic personality. So this symphonic personality can also carry the same sins, the same mistakes as, let's say, an individual person can. An ultimate sin right now, which we have, and that's we come back to the circle, almost all assumptions of our understanding of international relations for the last 70 years are based on lies. So the purpose of the war is just make us face these lies. And it's not just about America. It's about the way we understand where, let's say, the states are coming from. It's the assumptions that anybody can have a state. Not self-intuitive. It's an assumption of the nature of international law. It's not self-clear at all. It's an assumption about war. Let's say we want to talk about peace, but you can talk about peace in international relations. And it's very easy to understand, because the only condition for peace in international relations to be is actually for time to stop. It is a philosophical problem. And there was a philosopher, and I have an article on Symbolic World on it, Thomas Gobbs, with his Leviathan project. So the only way to stop international wars, you need to be just very clear, is to put the whole world under one universal tyrant. That's literally the only way to stop it mentally. Logically, so not mentally, logically. It's literally the only way. Because unless it happens, changes happen. People don't understand that, for example, our assumption in international relations is that borders are something stable. But historically, borders move constantly. In a way, there are no borders in history. It's a kind of illusion we take because they can be for a certain period of time, but all borders are frontiers. So they're also always moving. And why are they moving? Well, that's one of the questions I've been asking myself all over this years, and I think I came to a plausible enough answer. And I think all this movement is happening precisely so your words meet your deeds. So to an extent, culture, civilization, let's say subject, can put the money where your word is. So let's say let's say you're a great power. You claim to be a great power. Well, you need to be a great power and not just say that you're a great power. And historically, what this function of war as a flood is to make you show. Is it just to say, or do you actually are? And in that respect to America, are you actually a global superpower, or you just say that you're a superpower? Something along this line. But if this happens, you understand that there will be constant movement. There always will be a movement. Something will always change. Some things will stay, but some things will always change. And change has the violent nature in it. Like there is always a matter of pain, there is always a matter of struggle, and there is always a matter of impersonality. So it's, as you see, it's way more complicated than one bad guy just ruining the global peace.
Right, because the global peace is what you said. It implies the Leviathan. And so global peace, I feel like you might be saying global peace is a fool's gold. It's not possible.
It's a dangerous fool's gold. I think there is, as an Orthodox, like, you know this, but maybe your audience not knows it. But you keep to forget what will be the message of Antichrist. What will it bring to people? Peace.
Peace. It will replace Christ with a false peace.
That's so. All I'm saying is that you need to be pretty careful with the word peace. Yes, there is a peace of Christ, but there's also a peace of Antichrist. And
because that's inside peace versus the outside peace. Yeah.
It's one way, and another way, it's a peace without proper hierarchy. Like now it's a nativity fast, and you remember that on nativity feast, actually there is a pretty clear formula which is given to us, like the way angels chant, glory to the God in the highest, and peace of earth. Well, you can see it as a conditional. If there is no glory to God in the highest, universally, how can you have peace? If you don't, the antithesis to war is not peace, it's liturgy. So if you don't have a liturgy, how can you have, then your even desire for peace is a way of your arrogance. Like I want to keep my sins, but I just want to have peace. And history does it, and history always, like, that millennia after millennia makes you face that it doesn't work. We know, like, you need to reap what you sow, and you need to not just pretend to be something, but actually be something. And it works on an individual level, on a collective level, and also on an elite level. You need to understand that historically there is a reason war was the main reason for elite selection. It's just the only way for them to make responsible for anything. If your elite people don't fight, they can afford the most ridiculous things because they don't bear true responsibility.
And I'm hearing you speak, and I think of the two-headed eagle, the Byzantine sign, the Russian sign. This is the role of the patriarch, which is
in a proper fashioned way. Yes,
it's to remind the outer expression of the state that they have a responsibility to the inner confession of the church. And so, how's that going in Russia, in your mind?
Ooh. Now it is complicated. And here, comes a very unique, almost, I would say, Russian story, which is also predicated on another philosophical gap, which Russia borrowed from the West. You may cut it, just I'm collecting my thoughts. So, on the surface, everything is all right. I would put it this way. The church is, people are coming slowly, it's coming after the Soviet Union, but there is a growth in practitioners slowly, and the church, slowly is getting, monasteries are opened, restored, churches are restored. Patriarch is speaking on church matters. But still, there is a separation of church and state. And as an American, you might think it's a good thing. But truth be told, it's not such a good thing. That's an interesting part, philosophically. Yes, there is a certain analytical separation, and you can obviously understand it in your mind. But think about it this way. What is a people? What unites people? Culture. Just let's go to linguistic matters. It is culture. And what is culture? It's a cult. So it is a religion. And you can say that effectively people is a church. Okay. So if you say that your state is separate from your church, effectively you are saying that your state is separate from your people. And it's dangerous in both ways. For both state and both for people.
Very well said. Very interesting. Because it can destroy. People think that you take this. I'm stepping on it, but that is the best thought. Go for this. I want to really.
Thank you. The way it destroys things, there are two ways it is destroyed. First, if state is without its people, it's called colonial administration. Just pretty straightforward. If I don't feel that people are who I'm governing over, I'm just a president. I just preside, but it's not mine. Like there is this level of separation, and I can't, even if I want, I can't truly care about it because there is this thing which disunites us. But for people with us, there is a similar problem. Like there is always this animosity. There is always potential the skid and thought it will betray us or it will betray me. Basically, there is a huge tax on doing any common good thing. I would put it this way. Because to do common good, you need to trust. And when there is a split and there is a trust, there can be only one worse, basically, thing than this separation. It's when so it's not that bad yet in Russia, thanks God, when you have people without a church. Because do you know how people without church is called? Population. It's just the population. It's just units. It's just numbers. We can rearrange them. We can reassemble them. We can move them somewhere there. We can move them somewhere here. And that's, you can see now, is a little bit of new modern dilemma, like which this whole desanctification of power, which was supposed to be to protect, in its turn led first to the split and lowering the opportunities to do common good. And this is our project of modernity. This is what is happening right now. This is like, as you call it, the end time. This is what's ending. Because this is what modernity started with. Modernity started with a very simple premise that those who who rules, to whom belongs the face, effectively. But that's a lie. It is an inversion. In fact, it's like that's whose face is in a place, then who rules. Idea comes first. But we live in a separation. But for this separation, for this simulacrum to function, you need to continuously destroy churches, or you need to continuously destroy people. You need to create this split. Here comes another political, modern philosophical lie, which again, why war will continue. Maybe not this one, maybe particular. I call it the second 30-year war. 30 years. Second 30 years war. Why? Because the modernity started with 30 years war in 17th century, and I think it's going to end now with another 30-year world. So I didn't have a hypothesis that we are reliving the 17th century, but to heal the mistakes. And for different nations, it's different mistakes. There is one big common mistake, but also for different nations.
What's the big common mistake?
Separation of spirit, separation of spirit from mind and body.
I was just going to say that for me, you're describing the atheist mistake, which is...
But it started way before atheism appeared. But you need to understand very well why it's appeared, because the reasons they did it is related to war. Because there is an element... Remind me to come back to your original question. I remembered, but just like I think it's a perfect moment to answer it now. You know that in the Revelation, the Christ has a sword coming out of his mouth. Flaming sword. The word and the sword are kind of similar things. There is an inherent fight in like truth and falsehood. Basically, if a person sincerely believes in something, like here comes the problem of unity multiplicity, it becomes dangerous. 30 years war was the most devastating war for European history. Like truly the most horrendous war. Like in terms of absolute numbers, not as much as Second World War, but in terms of proportions, way worse. And why it has happened? Because different people, different denominations pursued kingdom on earth. Like you need to understand it. So they all believed sincerely in the fact that they are bringing heavens to earth through the means of external. And through this, they created the most horrible experience they could imagine. And then some thinkers, like again Hobbes, the most important, basically came, guys, we're gonna just kill all of us. Let's just put this aside. Originally, they didn't even want to completely cut it down, but let's just put it aside. We can't agree on it. We agree that Pope can do this thing, but there is no consensus. And truth be told, Hobbes definitely didn't know Eastern mysticism at all. So it was just Protestants versus Catholics. So we know Pope is wrong. But if each one of us will pursue this, let's say, the way we do, we need to separate these things, otherwise it will completely engulf us. And that's why we need a state, a Leviathan, and a sovereign to rule over us. Like, You're talking to Andrew. It's effectively the story. It's a story behind the story he's trying to present to you.
Sovereign state, which I want to talk about next.
Yes. But the problem is it doesn't work. That's the saddest part of it. You can't separate these things. So you need to be willing to step into this danger zone. You need to be willing to step into the danger zone where spirit is not separated from mind.
Go back 1 second. So I know this is a history guy, but explain this real clearly to our audience. So the mistake was ending the war and really creating a new society in many ways by setting aside those difficult inside questions of peace and simply creating a secularity, right? A seculum, where those questions were no longer entertained. And is that
kind of
split?
It is a split. It's separated. It's like it's irrelevant. And then you can see why why we don't need kings, because kings are coming through God. So we need to create something different. We need to create an illusion of that the power comes from the people. Sorry, yes, I know. Big illusion of modernity. Power doesn't come from the people. I'm sorry. Like we can talk about it on a very different level, but never in a history majority wanted everything. Just the one clear example for you. Absolute majority of American colonists in 1975 didn't want to separate from Britain. It was not a majority decision. If you would collect like a poll, they would be like, what? It was a group of radicals who effectively decided to separate themselves from. So just to be clear, so it's not about people, like, and it's another American story. But so, and then you had basically, after this separation, you had 400 years of trying different lies and building different lies. Like in America, late in 20th century, you create Bernays. There was this guy called Edward Bernays, the creator of modern, the creator of modern. It's not just marketing. Like, I love it because he's so blatantly honest. Like, in his very first, his book is called On Propaganda, and effectively the very first paragraph sounds something like this. There is an unseen mechanism of hidden power in our country which rules everything, and that's what we call democracy. Literally first paragraph, just to be clear. Like, so he was very honest about what he is doing. And you see, so you had to basically build different machines of illusion to avoid answering this original inception question. And my hypothesis, here is a hypothesis, is that current age of war is for us to face this original illusion, this original mistake, that you can't truly separate spiritual from bodily and rational. There must be unity between them on an individual level, on a state level, on a society level, on a church level. All these things are connected together. But you can see that's, let's say, positive way of doing it. Another way, which we humans historically would be doing greatly and most likely, to double down. Okay, our illusion was not good enough because it was not global enough. It wasn't like perfect enough. Let's make a perfect illusion.
The bad guys got in the way, yeah.
Bad guys. But here comes the thing. The problem is that bad guys are human. So like, let's say it's about because they are too aligned to their states. It's because they're aligned to their language. It's because they're aligned to their families. We need to create this perfect atomized individual, and there will be nothing between him and the sovereign power.
So Andrew Faberov is a friend of ours. He was in the news pretty profoundly, and I'm going to have him on the podcast. He was involved in bribes that were going both ways, and had his moment of fame there with Giuliani, and he evolved with the gas. We'll get into it. I know the story, but not you know the story too. Yeah. Was on the hook for a lot of problems at the time of Trump's first election. Is that correct? I had that right.
You do have that right, but gosh, you definitely now make him challenging to present himself.
Now he'll present himself. He'll come and tell us the story, but he's deeply involved in a production called Sovereign State. I'm reading the script right now. We're going to have a talk. It's really about Ukraine on some level, right? What's the Ukrainian role in all of this as you see it in the war?
If you ask me now, I think ironically, Ukraine is a catalyst. Ukraine is a catalyst for everything we've been talking about. It is an age the name of the place literally means edge. Edge, like literally. Like if you translate it from Slavonic into, let's say, English, it would be edge. So the purpose of Ukraine, I think, is to make everyone face their lies. I'm not sure Ukraine will survive this. I will be straightforward, because there is a lot of lies in Ukraine, and you can talk way more with Andrew about it. So maybe it won't be able to face its own lies. But ironically, providentially, if you want to put it this way, for example, it's making Russia face its own lies. It's making Russia, like, for example, Russia was so proud of its military being the first-rate military in the world. Well, war shown it was not. It's getting there now, providentially, and like so many like assumptions and foundations which were self-evident and were considered to be just here, even part of what we talked before with you. They are now being faced. The same you can say to an extent about Europe. The same you can say to an extent to being about the general global understanding of things. So I do think the historical purpose of this, let's say, Ukraine role in the story is exactly to make everybody look into a mirror, like effectively into your own mirror. So, yeah.
What does your soul tell you about the death, though? I mean, I like the way you're describing and understanding war and history. It resonates with my understanding. That doesn't mean it's good, but I get it. It's,
I'm not saying it's truth. It's
a revelation, right? It's constantly something that feels truth. But
here
feels people are dying. Mothers losing sons. How does a Christian sort that out? And how does a Ukrainian Christian and a Russian Christian sort that out?
Okay, two questions. Basically, you ask two questions. I will try to provide answer to both. To the first,
that's why you're on the show, to help me, because I asked.
To the first, we have a scripture, which is actually pretty blunt. Like you mentioned death, and you remember in the Peter, it's the wages of sin is death. Individual, like, we accept this tragedy. We don't welcome it, but we don't hide from it hypocritically, like as we discussed before. Like if you've been building life for 400 years, then the death will come for you one way or another. And the second thing is what you do. And here comes another tricky part of our age. It makes us think we can affect so many things we can't affect at all. Basically, it creates these traps for our attention. And it allows us not to care about what you can actually do in your power right here and right now. To your question, if there is a Ukrainian refugee near you, that's where you can help. Or like Russian refugee, or let's say one way or another. But if there is something, do what you can do. Like that's the thing. And kind of almost don't challenge, like don't raise this fist of like, why is this like happening in this like, arrogant way? Like do what you can do. Like, and that's what many people do. Like, I know that's like what is many. Do your duty. That's another thing, like related to this. Do your duty. Remember what, like, it's related to this, like when soldiers came to John the Baptist, like, what should we do? Just do your job and don't complain, effectively. Like, I'm sorry, I'm butchering the answer, but it was effectively this.
No, a priest here, Father Thomas Hopko, used to say, how do you fix the war in Ethiopia? Pick a spot. You say, take flowers to your neighbor.
It is true, because I think if we help to understand that, because it's much more complex than just bad guys versus good guys. I wish it were that easy. It's not that easy. It's never that easy. Like in that sense, a little bit like World War II, like, let us believe this, comic book picture, because, okay, yes, there was one really bad guy, but historically it's such an exception when you actually have this kind of just one super duper, let's say, evil side of things. Historically, it's very rare the case. Usually both parties have pretty decent arguments, and like if I said, we mentioned, there is logical element involved, in the sense that I have my argument, you have my argument, and let's say, and just who is more just and who started it first ultimately depends from which time you count. Here is the thing. If you count from February 2022, okay, Russia started. If you count from 1999, different people started. If you count from 2004, different. Like, And that's why from a truly philosophical or religious perspective, it's almost pointless to discuss it in this matter. That's why we were trying to look into this, what is actually what I'm trying to do. Like the podcast is a tradition of religious philosophy and political theology. So it's trying to show this, spiritual and religious phenomena behind what we consider to be separate from it. As you've noticed, nothing is separate. Everything is connected. Modern academia doesn't allow itself to do it. And here I think is one of the big problems why this most important and in the same ways quite simple matters are just completely missed because our attention is caught on different things or even thoughts is caught on different. We just don't think in these frameworks. That's why nothing makes sense. And trying to make sense out of it is pretty challenging task.
I just think you've helped us. Your approach as a philosopher, you were reminding me of Volodskin, who wrote Loris, and I had him on the podcast. People can go back. It was tough because his English was tough, but your English is very nice, by the way. But he kept doing what you just did, which when talking about the difficulties of Russia and Ukraine, he would always approach it in this big cavernous way, like out from beneath it, from deep in a barrel. It wasn't pointed. It was always cavernous, and it always had to do with human nature. And it always reminded me of the great Russian artists who they don't really take things head on. The American idea, I was once working out, and I was like barbells, 10, 20, 30, 40. I was in a little gym somewhere, and this man came in, very lithe, East Asian, and he started to just do very slow movements, and he was doing some form of Tai Chi or something. And then he just looked at me and said, "You Americans always have this way about you." And he's real sweet. He wasn't accusatory. He said, sometimes it's better to actually do less. And when I listen to Russians try to describe how things maybe need to be understood, it usually starts with this big idea. And I find it beautiful. And it's one reason I became Orthodox. It accounts.
Well, let's definitely, I would say, it's through the grace of Orthodoxy. Like that definitely help. Not help, but it's what has framed, like people don't understand, but you would agree that, for example, all of the classical Dostoevsky, effectively, Russian literature, which people read even globally, but it's effectively all is a commentary to gospel. All good Russian literature is talking about gospel one way or another. It's the only interesting part, truth be told. Everything else is kind of not. And one final thing about war, since you mentioned how, but in a more simple, practical, dumbbell way of doing it. Kind of the same on a personal level. Whenever anything happens, both on a country level or in a state level or interstate level, you need to ask a right question. And actually there is one right question in that respect. It's not like why this thing is happening. You can, but it's not exactly, it won't help you much. But it will keep you trapped. Better way, let's say why flood came. Why flood has came. What's the purpose of the flood coming from God's perspective? You can even add why why God has led it, not why, but what for this has happened. And then you see how everything shifts with this just one question. It actually opens the possibilities.
Can I end there with a toast to you?
Sure.
The difference. Why did this happen? Technically, how is probably more how the West would ask. And in other places, they ask, what's the purpose of this? And it implies that we might not have to fix it. It implies you might just have to learn from it. So I want to toast to you because I want to do this on all our podcasts now, but to your time for coming on and also for this bridge kind of person that you are. It's very fascinating. I think I'm one of those people, and I meet a lot of people who seem to be able to walk across the bridge. It makes me rather useless to be able to understand both sides in the sense that I don't really get anything done on either side of these cultural divides. But I want to say there's something good about being able to understand both sides. So to your work.
The bridges.
Yeah,
Marges.
All right, guys, that's Pavel Shchelin. Fantastic. He and Andrew were really interesting guests down at the Art of Tamada. Both of them were great at the Tamada. We just had moments of deep laughter and intense, I would say, learning. Thanks for listening. Sorry for my voice. Christianities continues. We're doing some cool shooting coming up. So keep a lookout for us, and much love and peace.